Yo, what's going on, guys? Swift9, and I'm back with another schedule preview of the SEC. So now we are doing the South Carolina Gamecocks. They have one of the hardest schedules you will ever see in college football. They face North Carolina and Texas A&M. Wait, no, not Texas A&M, Clemson, out of conference, as well as App State, who's no picnic either. And they face Georgia, Florida, and Alabama, arguably the three best teams in the SEC. So it's an extremely hard schedule for South Carolina, so they're going to have to get wins whenever they can. But they are a pretty good team, so let's see how they handle this extremely tough schedule. So let's get into it. So South Carolina starts off their difficult 2019 schedule in Charlotte, North Carolina, I believe, against North Carolina, obviously. You know, North Carolina is in a bit of a rebuild right now. They have a new coach in Mack Brown, I believe. I think North Carolina will put up a shot. I think they'll put up a fight. You know, they're going to be hyped up going into this game. They're at home, I believe, so they're going to be able to keep it a close game for the first half. But I think South Carolina is just overall the better team, and they're going to distance away from North Carolina in the second half and win 38-17. And this is a big win for them because they have to take every win they can get with this extremely tough schedule. So one of the few cupcake games that South Carolina has the entire season is at home against Charleston Southern. Against South Carolina, I expect them to take full advantage of this because they know how tough their schedule is, and they know they're not going to get another opportunity like this again. This is their easiest game on the schedule, and I'm going to give them the 49-3 win, as South Carolina heads to 2-0 in the season. A great start, but we're going to start hitting the meat of their schedule, and here's where the big boy teams come in. But South Carolina does beat Charleston Southern here. So South Carolina's biggest game of the year at home against Alabama in the SEC CBS opener. This is South Carolina's Super Bowl. Let's be real here. This is their biggest and toughest game of the year. Will they rise to the occasion like very few teams do? I think they crumbled against Georgia last year. The occasion got to them. And I think a very, very similar result will occur this year. The occasion will get to them, and they will crumble under the pressures. I'm going to give Alabama the 45-10 win. I mean, it's Alabama early on in the season against an SEC opponent. That's not a very good matchup for South Carolina. A lot of teams have fallen victim to Alabama's SEC opener, and I believe that this is their SEC opener. So Alabama dominates South Carolina here, and South Carolina gets their first loss of the season. So against Missouri, South Carolina heads back on the road. This is a very, very interesting game. I feel like these teams are kind of right there together. They're both decent teams, but not quite there yet. I'm going to give South Carolina the 35-31 win here on the road. Again, I think South Carolina knows that they can beat Missouri, and they have to take advantage of these smaller games, or not even smaller, just medium games. And they have to beat teams that are very similar talent-wise to them. They have to step up and win these games if they hope to even make a bowl game this year. So I'm giving South Carolina the 35-31 desperation win here against Missouri as they hit 3-1 and 1-1 on SEC play and on the season. So South Carolina heads back home against Kentucky. This is another big game for South Carolina because it's another one of those games where they're kind of on par with Kentucky, and they have to win these games that can go 50-50. They have to win the close games like this against teams like Missouri and Kentucky and Tennessee and teams like that if they hope to have some success this year. And I think that they get another big win here against Kentucky with a walk-off 27-24 field goal win. I went over this in my Kentucky video. I think South Carolina has the slight edge at quarterback, and I think that'll make all the difference in the world in this extremely tight game. I think Jake Bentley will come up huge and get South Carolina a big win on the year. So South Carolina heads back on the road in arguably their second biggest game of the year against Georgia. Let's take a step back to 2017. South Carolina was one of the few teams that actually put up a big fight against Georgia in Athens, and back in 2018, everybody thought that this could be South Carolina's crowning moment, that they could get it done and prove that they belong in the upper echelon with Georgia. And they crumbled under the pressure. You know, Georgia blew them out, went into Columbia, South Carolina, and embarrassed South Carolina. And I think Georgia will win against South Carolina in this game, but it'll kind of be like the 2017 one, a lot more of a competitive game. South Carolina puts up a fight, but eventually loses 35-20. Georgia's just the better team, They're just better than South Carolina, as simple as that. South Carolina has the heart and desperation, but sometimes that's just not enough to get the win. South Carolina's brutal schedule continues as they head back home to face the Florida Gators. So I went over this in my Florida Gators video. I think South Carolina is going to be desperate, and they know that their season is on the line at this point, so they're going to put up the best of South Carolina. I think it's going to be very, very similar to the game last year, where South Carolina gets out to a quick start, but Florida rallies back for a huge comeback. And I'm going to give Florida the 31-30 win and another heartbreaking loss for South Carolina, as South Carolina's schedule is really starting to toughen up and their record is really starting to dip, and South Carolina's season is in jeopardy now with this huge loss and heartbreaking loss against Florida. So largely I think South Carolina fans would agree with me so far on this list, but here's where they might disagree a little bit. Against Tennessee, I believe it is in Knoxville, I do believe. So South Carolina is coming off 2 heartbreaking losses against Florida and Georgia, and they are exhausted. I do think South Carolina are a better team than Tennessee, do not get me wrong. But I am giving Tennessee the 2017 victory because of South Carolina's brutal schedule. I think Tennessee catches them off guard and gets the big victory here against South Carolina. I went over this in my Tennessee video again. It's just, I think Tennessee is going to be more fresh by this point. South Carolina is coming off 2 brutal losses, so I am giving Tennessee the upset victory. So South Carolina heads back home to face the Vanderbilt Commodores. I'm going to give South Carolina the 31-14 win here to get back on track. You know, they've gone through a rough stretch of 4 or 5 games, 3 losses in a row, so I think South Carolina kind of gets their season back together and gets back to above 500, defeating Vanderbilt in a convincing win. South Carolina is just better than Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt doesn't really have much talent on their team right now. They are in a rebuilding mode. And I think South Carolina is desperate to get back on track, and I think that they do here against Vanderbilt. So one of the most famous cupcake teams any person could ever get, the Appalachian State's, I think, Mountaineers, I believe. But I mean, Appalachian State has had a lot of success against top-tier teams. Remember the game against Michigan? They've been competing with SEC teams the past couple of years, and I think they did the same here against South Carolina. South Carolina does win 17-0, but Appalachian State keeps it a close game all the way until the 4th quarter, where South Carolina finally is able to create some distance. I love Appalachian State. They were in the top 25 at one point last season, even though I don't believe that they deserve to be that high. They are a great team to watch. This is their Super Bowl, so I think that they put up a good fight against South Carolina. But South Carolina knows how big this game is, and they do not want to be embarrassed and end up under 500, especially because they're going to have a couple tough games heading up here at the end of the season. So it is no secret that I have been extremely high on South Carolina's next opponent, Texas A&M, upcoming in the SEC season, I guess. But I do believe that South Carolina puts up a great fight here. I am going to give Texas A&M the win because they are at home, and South Carolina is going to be looking ahead to face Clemson, which is a huge game for them. I thought about giving South Carolina the win here for a second, but I finally went back to Texas A&M right before I started filming this. So I'm going to give Texas A&M the 35-31 victory at home. South Carolina puts up a tough fight. They are proud losers, but again, Texas A&M, I believe, just has the better coach. That's what I think it comes down to. I am a bigger believer in Jimbo Fisher than I am Will Muschamp. Obviously, as a Florida fan, I don't think Will Muschamp's a good coach in the slightest. South Carolina heads back home for their biggest game of the year against the Clemson Tigers. I've heard a lot of South Carolina fans say that they have a shot to beat Clemson based on how good of a fight they put up last year, which, I mean, I think it'll be kind of like it was last year. An offensive game with Jake Bentley improving a lot. But again, Clemson's just way better than South Carolina. I am going to give Clemson the 42-28 win, my bad, over South Carolina. So unfortunately, I don't think South Carolina is good enough to compete with Clemson, especially not right now. After such a difficult schedule, they're exhausted by the time this game rolls around. They're probably deep in their depth chart, and Clemson, I think, is just going to be the better team. They're going to win. The better team will win, and it's the right result. Clemson's just a better team. I cannot stress that enough. I think that South Carolina is a good, scrappy team, led by a good, scrappy quarterback in Jake Bentley, but in the end, Clemson gets the 42-28 victory here in rivalry week. So I know a lot of South Carolina fans are going to be mad at the 6-6 record that I gave them. Let me make this clear. I think they're more of an 8-4 talent team. I think they're way more talented than their record will show. They just got a tough break. You know, not a lot of teams can do better than South Carolina did with this schedule. I mean, you face the two teams that were in the national championship last year in Alabama and Clemson. You obviously face Georgia and Florida, who are rapidly improving, who are the young guns challenging Alabama in the SEC. You face Texas A&M. You have North Carolina to start off the year. This is the toughest schedule in college football. You cannot convince me otherwise. So South Carolina, take kind of the year to regroup, focus more on recruiting instead of focusing on wins. So I'm going to give them a 6-6 record. Again, I think that they are better than 6-6, but that's the record that I gave them. That's the record that I think they will get. Luckily, they do go 500, and they do make a bowl game, so hopefully South Carolina fans won't get too mad at me for that. But make sure to check out a lot of my other videos. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. Have the greatest day of your life, and peace.